Hello and welcome. I'm Exit Light, and this is my podcast. Hello, everybody. Today is our UK podcast, so our co host is Rob. Say hello, Rob.
Hello, everybody.
And of course, we have moderator Maya and producer Jeremy. If you want to leave comments during today's podcast, go ahead and leave comments. If I don't see them and they're something that needs to be addressed immediately, Maya will tell me. Today's topic is serial killers, and we're going to discuss nature versus nurture. Are you born a serial killer, or do you become a serial killer? So we have plenty to talk about today. If you would like to, after the podcast, we will have a conversation, and you guys can give us your opinions and any comments you'd like to make. We will discuss then too. Towards the end of this podcast, we're going to call Jory, and he's going to be able to come in, and all three of us are going to be able to discuss this topic. So I'm pretty excited about that. Okay. Is there anything you'd like to start with saying, Rob?
The the subject today, I just want everybody to understand that we're going to be looking at it from, like you said, nature versus nurture. We're not lunatic serial killers. Just wanted to get that out there for everybody.
Right. And do you want to go ahead and start with one of the serial killers that you have chosen?
Yeah, I'm from Manchester in the UK, and in the 60s, there were two of them, Myra Hindley and Ian Brady. Myra Hindley was from Manchester, and Ian Brady, he was Scottish, he was from Glasgow. And between 1963 and 1965, they lured, if that's the right word, 4 children, Pauline Reed, John Kilbride, Keith Bennett, and Leslie Ann Downey, into their car, and they took them up onto the moors, onto Saddleworth Moors, and they did terrible things to them, and they murdered them. Well, they murdered 3 of them on the moors, and one of them they murdered in Myra Hindley's grandmother's house. This was a little bit before I was born, but I can remember my dad telling me about it. Now, Myra Hindley, this is a point that we're going to come across a lot tonight, because it's something that interests both me and Tracy. Myra Hindley, she came from quite a bad, her home life was quite bad. The father was really, really, he treated her very, very badly. He beat her a lot, and the way he taught her to deal with conflict was by using violence. Now, some people could say that's an excuse. I don't like to think of it as an excuse. In 1961, when she was just 18 years old, she was working as a typist in a factory in Manchester, and she met Ian Brady, who was quite a bit older than her. Ian Brady had quite an extensive criminal record, but that didn't put her off. That didn't send up any warning signs for her, and she pretty much became obsessed with him. Once they started going out, seeing each other properly, this is bizarre. He was obsessed with Nazis and the far right and the SS and all the terrible things that the Nazis did to the Jewish people in the Second World War. And they used to spend their lunch breaks together. And I don't know if you've heard about. I don't know if you've heard this, Tracy. The
No,
way
I
they used to
haven't.
spend the way the way they used to spend their lunch break is by reading um, each other stories about Nazi atrocities.
Oh, wow.
Uh, That was something I didn't know, and I read that today, and it just, I mean, it just, you just can't get your head around it.
Right.
That's one of the things I found today when I was researching the serial killers. I thought I knew quite a lot about. You can't put a normal sort of, you can't put your head around the kind of things that they did.
Right.
The
Well,
first, go on, sorry, Chaser.
no, no, sorry. Go ahead.
The first, if you can hear me sign a lot, it's because I found it quite difficult, to be honest, today. Pauline Reed was the first little girl. Well, she was 15 or 16. She was on her way to a dance, and they stopped and they they enticed her into the car, and they took her up on the moors, and he raped her, and he slit her throat, and they um, buried her on the moors. And in the next year after that, they took Keith Bennett and what was the other little boy called? John Kilbride. And they did pretty much the same to them both, and took them up on the moors, and they murdered them and posed for pictures after they buried the bodies, and then went down the road to the local pub and had a drink and a meal.
Mm.
Crazy, crazy. But for me, as the father of a 10-year-old little girl, in December 1964, they took a little girl she was 10, called Leslie Ann Downey, and she was at the fairground, and they took her, for some reason she was on her own, which sounds crazy, doesn't it, today? You
Yeah.
wouldn't let your 10-year-old go to, but we're talking about in the 60s, it was a different world.
Right.
You know, you let your kids play out. You know that in the UK this wasn't heard of. This was We had never ever had anything like this. So it wasn't so strange for a little girl to be at the fair. I wouldn't let my 10-year-old go to the fair on her own now. I don't let her go anywhere.
Right.
But they convinced her to help unload some groceries from their car. Then they took her to
Mm-hmm.
Myra Hindley's grandmother's house,
Mm-hmm.
and they did some horrible things to her. And in the process of doing these horrible things to her, they recorded on a tape recorder basically her screaming for her life.
Yeah.
And when they were finally caught and they were taken to court, they had to play the tape recordings in the courtroom. And I can always remember my dad telling me that hardened policemen had been on the force for 20, 30 years, and everybody in the court was just crying.
Right.
Um, I have skirted around a little bit of the actual things that were done
Yes.
to the kids, but I don't think we need to go there.
No.
If you're that way inclined, you can look up yourself. What it isn't. That's not what the kind of podcast we want to do tonight.
Right.
Um, and that was the first type of. I mean, that was the first sort of any. I don't think we'd even coined the phrase serial killer.
Mm-hmm.
So that in the UK,
Mm-hmm.
that was the first one that I had heard of. Now, I come from quite a difficult background. My both parents were alcoholics, and my dad was really abusive. I did not turn into a serial killer. Everybody that I grew up with came from that kind of background, and they didn't turn into serial killers.
Mm-hmm.
So I cannot accept that that's an excuse. Sorry, people might have different opinions. I apologise if it's not the same as your opinion, but I do not think that because of your background, that will turn you into someone who wants to go out and murder and rape children.
Right.
And the big question I've got is how. I mean, we were talking about this today. How can two people meet each other and have this common interest? I can't even
Right.
get my head around it.
Yeah. Yeah. We were talking about that today and how, well, for one thing, he started sharing his fantasies with her,
Yeah,
and she became the person who would enable these fantasies for him. And like I told you, that I feel like she's almost worse than him because a normal person, first off, you wouldn't, if you, if to even admit that you had those fantasies is crazy enough, but to be the person who decides that you're going to go ahead, when they took that first child up to the moors, she claimed that she didn't know what he was going to do, but when he came back, she obviously knew. So from then on, when she would find these children, and when she taped that little girl and what happened, she would lure the kids because they weren't afraid of a woman, and she had grown up in the same neighborhood. Um, in my mind, she's, if 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 not just as bad, worse than him, because she was the spider pulling them in and feeding this guy who was a monster, who didn't have the guts to go do it himself, right? He needed somebody to
yeah.
help him. And so maybe if she hadn't helped him, maybe he never would have got the guts to do it himself.
I was
But
just going to say
she,
that. Yeah,
you
yeah,
know, she enabled that to happen. And like I said, I had told you I had seen that documentary. And one, the mother of the girl who was recorded, she is broken, shattered. She's shattered and fully over medicated every day just to get through life. And I just
yeah,
cannot imagine. And she knew this girl who had lured her daughter in.
yeah.
So that case is just, I it's awful. It's to think that like you said, two of them would get together in the first place, and the possibility that maybe he wouldn't have done it if he didn't have somebody who was not only supporting him but began to encourage this behavior.
Well, I read today that he they fantasized about being criminals and robbing banks and things like that, and getting rich, and living this fantasy lifestyle. But they decided that the that robbery and stealing wasn't their forte, and they just moved straight on to murder. Now,
Right.
usually there's a progression. Maybe for him because he was a petty thief and he burgled a lot of houses, and he did have a criminal record. So for him, there was a progression.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I mean, people who commit robbery, it very rarely will turn out to be a serial killer.
All right. That's a pretty big leap.
Exactly, yeah. And do you remember me saying about all the Nazi, um, the Nazi stuff that she that they were reading to
Yeah.
each other?
Yeah.
She was dark haired. She had dark hair, Myra Hindley,
Really.
and she dyed her hair blonde, and used to wear this dark red lipstick to look like what the Germans
Mm.
thought the Aryan perfect woman would look like. So that's why she changed her appearance to please Ian Brady, because he wanted her to look this way. It's
Right.
just, I could have just wrote butt today, and I had to stop in the end because it was just, especially when it got onto that little girl, Leslie Ann Downey, who's 10.
Yeah.
I just kept thinking about my daughters, and I just thought, can't. I need to just stop now. I just, it's making me feel sick.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'm going to talk about Ted Bundy. Let's lighten it up in here. Okay, so Ted Bundy um, was born in 1946. His mother was 22 years old and she was a single mother. And back in those days, that was not something that was acceptable. And they sent her away to a home for girls where she delivered Ted. And then her parents raised Ted as if they had gone and her father drove to the girls' home after Ted's mother had come back and pretended that they had adopted him. So they raised Ted as his parents, and then the mom, after he was about 3 years old and she was 25, she went and left and married a man, and then they raised Ted as their son after that. Um, there is some talk that she named two people as the father of Ted Bundy, and it turned out that neither of those men were the father. And she had lied about, them, what their professions were and all this stuff. It was just, and there was some talk about the fact that it could have been that it was her father who was actually Ted's father. But as he grew up in a very typical, happy, working class family. Um, Around the age of 3, when he went to go live with his mother and her new husband, he started becoming fascinated with things like knives. Um, and there's a story that he spent the night at his grandma's house or his aunt's house, and she woke up in the middle of the night and he had placed a bunch of knives next to her in bed and denied that it had been him.
Oh.
Yeah. He started out by peeking into the windows of women when they were undressing. He was a peeping Tom, and he would sometimes break in and steal things from their houses, which is not unusual for a serial killer. Um, he went to the University of Washington, and like I told you yesterday, that 3 of the people I'm talking about today are serial killers from Washington State, which is where I was born and raised, and where a lot of the crazy goes. And he fell in love with a woman who was very rich, very beautiful, and when she broke up with him, it broke his heart. And a lot of the girls that he murdered looked just like her.
Ah.
So psychologists said that this was what um, pushed him towards killing. Although his explanation, he says he became a serial killer because he was addicted to pornography, and he claimed that this is a quote, every serial killer he has ever met also shared the same problem. Now, like we talked about yesterday, in reality, how many serial killers did Ted Bundy meet? Ted Bundy was probably the only one that he ever met. But he blamed it on pornography, which doesn't explain why he was killing women who looked exactly like the woman who broke his heart. Now, he was weird, and he would go back to the crime scene, and he would visit decomposing corpses of the women he killed and have relationships with
Oh,
them up until the point where the animals and decomposition had made the body so bad that he just couldn't.
oh,
Yeah.
I didn't know that. I didn't know that.
Ted Bundy was very, 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 very smart. He had gone to school and gotten his degree at the University of Washington to be a psychologist, and then he was accepted to the University of Utah to go to school and study to be a lawyer. And I'm going to tell you a couple of strange facts that people might not know about Ted Bundy besides that incident with the dead bodies, which I had not known. I don't think that was really I don't think that was really talked about in the media that would do that with the dead bodies. But
Is it necrophilia? I think there's
yes,
a phrase for it, isn't there?
yes,
Yeah.
he when he was put to death, he requested that his ashes be scattered in the Cascade Mountains in Washington State, where he had buried and defiled those bodies so that he could be there with them. And something really odd, I mean, that's really odd, but this is strange, is that he worked on as a at a suicide hotline. And for those of you who know authors, he worked with Anne Rule, who is a very famous author, and she worked at the same suicide hotline. And she said that he was skilled in this, that he was one of the best and the brightest at this hotline, and he could have gone down a path like that, right? But instead, he chose the exact opposite path to go down. So I I don't think there's anything you can say in his childhood that would make him a serial killer, right? Yeah, there was some issues with his mom, but she eventually raised him, and there was talk about his grandfather being his father, but I don't think that was something that Ted was aware of. It doesn't seem like that was something Ted was aware of. And so, by all accounts, he was raised in a normal family who loved him very much and was quite capable of being around people, going to school, working on a suicide hotline. So, is it a mental illness? Or was he born evil? Was he born evil?
I think what makes it more sort of chilling and more, I don't know if you feel the same way, is because he was so clever and educated. I think that puts a completely different sort of spin on it, really.
Yes.
Because, I mean, for all intents and purposes, from what I've read, he was quite a charming, nice. I mean, he wasn't a particularly bad-looking bloke, and he
Yeah.
was quite a quite a
He
charming guy.
he was very charming. As a matter of fact, he was. Hold on, let me answer one question. Mad Meerkat. I believe Ted Bundy was the serial killer who killed the nurses. Is that who you're talking about? Sorry. Um, he was so charming that after he'd been arrested and while he was being arraigned, he had met a woman online who married him, and they had a daughter together. Eventually, she figured out that, that she thought he was guilty of the crimes. So she divorced him, and their daughter grew up and completely changed her first and last name. It's believed that her name had been Rose Bundy, and she completely changed it so she'd have no connection. But yeah, he was well, and he was the way he would come up to women was to help them with their groceries. Do you need help with your groceries? Do you need me to put them in your car for you? And he would attack them. And they felt he was trustworthy. And yeah, good, a decent looking guy, very, very smart. Had the world at his fingertips.
Just crazy. I just don't get it at all. I just don't get it at all.
Yeah. Yep, that's one that I think it's the one who has the pretty normal backgrounds that really are confusing to me. You know, I don't buy that pornography made him do what he did to those bodies or kill those women. I don't buy that. That doesn't even make sense. That's a big leap. But
Well,
I mean, clearly there's something wrong with him. Was.
pornography. I mean, it's everywhere, isn't it, nowadays? Pornography, pretty much.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, then there'd be millions and millions of serial killers running around, killing.
Right.
There'd be no one left.
Exactly. That's right.
So I don't know where he got that from. Maybe he was just he tried. Did he not represent himself in court, or
Yes, he did.
Because he escaped, didn't he, while he was in court?
Yes, he did. He escaped jail, and he went on and killed 3 more women after he escaped. While he was out. He was I think one of the issues with Ted Bundy is that he thought he was so smart that he could outsmart everybody. And when he escaped from prison, that filled that part of him up, that he's so smart he can outsmart everybody. He escaped prison and he didn't feel afraid to be seen in public and kill 3 more women.
And that was the debate. Did he not? Was he the one that? I know he said about the groceries. Was he the one that pretended to have a broken arm and he was trying to get stuff into his little?
Yes.
Because that was the Silence of the Lambs ones, weren't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, the Silence of the Lambs. That character was created by a lot of these people we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah. Well, a lot of yours.
A lot of mine, yes. A lot of mine. All right, if you would like to just talk about your next serial killer.
Well, it's Sue again, and sorry guys, it's two young kids, 2 10-year-old boys who let me just check the dates so I'm getting the dates right. Jamie Bulger was 2 years old. 2 years old. He was born on the 16th of March 1990 in a place called Kirby, which is in Liverpool, which is just down the road from me. His mum took him shopping to the Strand shopping centre, shopping precinct, which probably would be called a mall. Is it a mall or whatever you call them in America?
A mall, yes.
Mall. And she had him in the shop, and she turned around for a second, like you do when you just lose sight of him for a second, and he was gone. And two 10-year-old boys, Robert Thompson, born on the 23rd. I found this quite strange today. Thompson was born on the 23rd of August, 1982, and John Venables was born on the 13th of August, 1982.
Oh,
So
really?
they were both born in August, which I didn't know. So there was, I think everybody's seen I don't know about everybody in America, but there's the famous footage of CCTV footage of him being taken, and he's in the middle, and the 2 boys are holding his hands, and they're taking him out of the shopping centre.
I think most people who are interested in serial killers, or even those who aren't, have seen that that CCTV tape of them. Yeah.
I had, or I have, a friend in Manchester who was a police officer. He came out of the police and went back in. And we were talking about this one night. These two boys who were 10 years old, took this little 2-year-old and they took him about 2.5 miles away from the shopping centre up onto a railway, on a railway embankment where the railway tracks were. They tortured this little boy. They killed this little boy. Then they put him on the train tracks. Remember, they were 10. They put him on the train tracks thinking that if he gets run over by a train, then it'll hide any evidence that we did it. So anyway, they got the body and they got pieces of wood, branches and stuff like that, and they tried to basically make him look like a bush by sticking branches into his body and sort of camouflaging him. And they were Thompson and Venables were charged on the 20th of February 1993, and they were taken to. Obviously, they're only 10-year-olds, so they can't. They weren't able to go to a adult prison, which they should have done. They came from working class backgrounds, but they weren't. Both parents worked. They weren't wanting for anything. They came from pretty stable backgrounds. There's not very much you can read about them because they were the parents were given new identities and were moved and given jobs. We were talking about this today. They were released. Do you know how long they served, Tracy?
What, till they were 18?
18. 8 years they served. 8 years. It's disgusting, that. It's absolutely disgusting. And they were given new identities, new everything, new national insurance numbers, new the full works, new names. They were given very well-paid jobs. Obviously, the parents had been moved and they had new identities. Now, this family's little Jamie's family, mum and dad split up. His mum is just she just looks like a shadow of herself, to be honest. And in 2010, Venables was rearrested on he broke one of his parole because they're on license for life and they've got certain rules that they can and can't do. He was found to be looking at child pornography
Oh my gosh.
on his computers, and he was rearrested and then let go again.
Oh my gosh.
And they say that crime doesn't pay.
Well, yeah, because like we were talking about, the perpetrators and their family were relocated, given well-paying jobs. The boys, when they got out, were given well-paying jobs. They got to start over from scratch with a different life, a different place. And the victims' parents they lost their child. They didn't get to start over. They got nothing. They separated. Their lives were ruined by these two boys.
And the mum, Jamie's mum, still to this day blames herself for that second of looking away. And
which we've all done.
Yeah. And she blames herself because obviously, but you can't watch your children constantly. It's so difficult, so difficult. But it was really, really bad. When it happened, it was terrible. And then to find out, because there was a couple of days where they hadn't found the body, and then to find
Mhm.
out that it was two 10-year-old boys, it just didn't register. That how could a 10? I mean, my Grace is 10.
Yeah.
She wouldn't hurt a bloody fly.
Well, yeah, and that's another thing about like, so at 10 years old, how do you find another 10-year-old
Yeah,
who will not immediately go tell their parents that if you have a friend and let's say, you're let's say Grace has a friend and Grace's friend says, "Hey, I want to go harm a child." Grace would tell you. So
she
how do you
just
find
yeah.
somebody who wouldn't tell you and who wouldn't tell their parents and who would go along with it? And in that case, were they born evil? Were they born evil?
Well, after all that has happened, for this, if it was a mistake, which I don't think it was, the one that Venables then in 2010, you would never ever, you would think to yourself, right, I've served 8 years in a little kids secure unit.
Yeah.
I've got a chance of a life. I am not going to F up. But he got caught looking at child porn. So, I mean, would he have turned out bad anyway? Well, he did turn out bad anyway.
Yeah.
If he hadn't met the other one, so to speak, would he
Yeah.
have gone on to be maybe a paedophile?
So I wonder if he was the instigator.
Yeah,
Was it his idea in the first place? And
yeah.
then,
I think he Venables was the main one, and Thompson was pretty much a little bit of a. I think he was a little bit slow, but
well,
still,
yeah, but I guess at 10, maybe uh, maybe if he was a little bit slow, and if his friend was aggressive and not really having an understanding of death is permanent sort of type of thing.
yeah.
I mean, their brains aren't even close to being completely formed yet. And then he goes on to live a normal life after that. Then you think, okay, maybe that was maybe that he was influenced, obviously in a completely horrific way. But when years later the other one is caught with child pornography, it makes me feel like he from the get go was a well. Have you ever heard the term bad seed?
Yeah.
Yeah, a bad seed. You know, I don't. I feel and like I feel some sympathy for the other 10-year-old who, especially if he was a little behind, that he could have been scared or not understanding exactly of what was happening.
Well,
I don't know. I want to give this child a benefit of the doubt,
Well,
but
like I was saying to you today, Venables was at a secure unit in a place called Eccles in Manchester called Barton Moss.
yeah,
And I worked for Manchester Social Services, and in the UK we have a thing called the casual bank, which basically means if you work in the care profession, you
hmm
can up hours at other units and basically get overtime.
hmm
And we had this guy who worked at his main job was working at Barton Moss, and he came and did the waking nights with me and my other worker. And once all the kids were asleep, and we used to have to stay on the landing to make because the kids were vulnerable, they were vulnerable children, and we would sit and we used to sit and talk about you talk about everything. It's a long like 12-hour shifts. It was a long night,
right,
and he said that he had met not directly, indirectly, this Venables, and he got the vibe off him that he wasn't a nice person. There was something going on with him, and he wasn't.
Right.
He said that he was dead. There's nothing in his eyes. There's nothing. It was just he wasn't a nice person, and he wasn't remorseful. He was like a little celebrity in 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 the secure unit.
Oh,
He
wow.
was done, but he wasn't a nice person.
Do you believe you could be born a bad seed?
Yeah,
Yeah, I do too.
I think some people are just evil.
Yeah,
If
I
it's
uh,
just,
I do too.
I think people can just be evil people, and for whatever reason, that's just the way things are. I think there is good and evil in the world,
Hmm.
and we need to stop making excuses for people. And I think the world would be a better place if we stop making excuses for everybody
Hmm.
and we judge people for what they've done, not for what they've
Right.
not judge people for what they have done, not for the excuses that we want to make for them. It makes us feel better, doesn't it? It makes people
Yeah.
feel better to put some. You get someone commits a terrible crime with Ted Bundy or the Moors murderers, or it makes people feel better if we can say, well, it's because of this. We are trained psychologists, psychiatrists. It's because of this, because of their
Right.
child, because of this. No, it's not. Other people have worse childhoods and don't turn
Yeah.
out serial killers. I know I'm repeating myself, but other people don't turn out to harm children.
Right.
Like I was saying
Yeah.
to you today, Tracy, my dad used to beat the shit out of my mum and me and my sisters. I have never ever put my hands on a woman for that reason. For that, for that, well, for the fact that it's wrong anyway. But it reinforces to me that that is not how you treat a woman or a female.
Hmm.
You do not put your hands on a female for whatever
Hmm.
reason, and
Right.
and that is according to, if you're going to go with the laws of, well, it's to do your childhood. I should be beating everybody up 24/7. But
Right.
sorry, it gets me annoyed.
The weird thing is that you would think that that would be the rule of thumb, but a lot of times that isn't. A lot of kids who see violence in their home grow up thinking that that's the way it's supposed to be, rather than you seeing it as that's the way it's not supposed to be. And unfortunately, a lot of people see it differently. They a lot of women raised in homes where there's abuse think that that's how they're supposed to be treated. That's what they're supposed to accept. And a lot of boys raised in abuse, seeing a woman be abused, think that this is okay. This is how it was. This is what's normal. Um, Although that doesn't make you a serial killer. That is still a giant leap to serial killer. Now,
Yeah,
I'm out of the mind. I agree with you. Like, I would say that is how not to be. But we can see statistically that, even watching your parents smoke cigarettes, you're more likely to grow up and be someone who smokes.
yeah,
Um, so I mean, but they're not watching their parents be serial killers.
mm,
Okay, so I'm gonna do John Wayne Gacy, who I think everybody's probably familiar with. This is the man who would dress up as the clown.
is a
Um,
McDonald's clown in there?
no, no, I don't think
all, these,
so.
all these years, I thought it was to do with McDonald's.
No.
I'm sorry, that's really bad taste.
Um,
If anybody works at McDonald's, I am really, really sorry. That was really out of bad taste. I'm sorry.
Nobody would go to McDonald's then. Nobody. Except for perhaps Ted Bundy and all the serial killers he's met. Except for he's dead, so probably not. So John Wayne Gacy was born in 1942. He was convicted of assaulting and murdering 33 teenage boys during the 70s. He was sentenced to death for 12 of those. And I don't know if you know how it works here, but usually if you've committed a number of murders, they don't take you to trial with all of the murders. They leave some so that if by some chance you were to a jury was to let you off, that they could retry you with the other murders.
That's
which,
clever.
Yeah, which is why you don't see him being sentenced to death for all 33. But they believe that he killed many, many more than that, and he buried them in the concrete underneath his house and in his backyard and all over where he lived. And his house has been completely demolished and torn down because of that. He would torture his victims and admitted to liking to see the fear in their eyes and to watch them die. So he would make sure that they died as slowly as possible. Now, the thing about John is that he did have a bad childhood. His father was an alcoholic, and he was very abusive to John and his mother. And he was also sexually abused by a close family member. He had a heart condition, and because of that, his father hated him for not being able to play sports. So one of the reasons he would get beaten was because his father considered him to be weak, and then he gained weight because he wasn't allowed to. They didn't even want him to do real exercise or anything. So his father would beat him then for being overweight, and the kids in the neighborhood would make fun of him. He didn't do well in school. However, when he got out of school, then he lived a normal, quote unquote, normal life. He was a volunteer in the community, was a very well-known figure, very well respected. He was a member of a group called the JCs, which is what did the community service. He owned his own business successfully for many, many years. He went into politics and ran for office. He was very well known, very, very liked, very, very trusted. And this is how he gained access to these young boys, was through his work in the community. And through owning his business, he owned a business that he redecorated homes. So he would gain access to people's homes. And then, of course, he would dress up as the clown and go to birthday parties. So even though John had come from a very abusive home, he went on to maintain what from all outside appearances looked to be a completely normal and very successful life. Yet, literally tortured young men and boys and to watch them die, to gain the pleasure of that, which, as we talked about before, beatings from an abusive father do do not make 99% of people on this planet a serial killer who tortures human beings for pleasure. And if you want to say he was mentally ill, the thing is that, I mean, obviously there's something wrong with him, but he was quite capable of living a normal life.
Was he married?
I think he was married 3 times. I believe he was married 3 times.
Did he only attack? It was only boys, weren't it, that he attacked?
Yes, it was only boys. Yep.
That's weird, that.
And then when he was in prison, he became a famous artist.
Yeah, I've seen. Yeah.
Many people wrote to him and got his artwork, which is, well, actually, that would be really weird. That would be this is gonna sound really weird of me, but that would be very interesting to me. I feel like that would be an insight, because art is so personal. That would be a real weird insight into him to own a piece of his art. It'd be so strange.
I'd be scared to put it up on the walls in my house.
Yeah, I was gonna say I don't think I would keep it in my house. That's for certain. But again, nurture versus nature. He was definitely not nurtured. But does that cause him to torture people? And then is it a mental illness? And Maya and I had a conversation. Moderator Maya and I had a conversation the other day, and we wondered if the abuse can cause somebody to become mentally ill, and then they act out their anger in that type of way. Is that possible? That he took his anger out on his father by torturing other little boys like he felt he was tortured.
Yeah, there could be something to that. There could be something to that.
Is almost sad, right?
Yeah.
It's so hard. It's very difficult line when you're talking about these people, because there's no doubt, hands down, that they're evil. But when you think about the fact that it's possible that he tortured somebody to feel less tortured, to soothe that little boy in himself, that's almost frightening, because you can feel a little bad about that.
Yeah, but don't you think that he would have gone back and taken out on his dad? Because in my case, once I'd left home at 15 and gone in the army, and then went from a little skinny thing to this big thing that I am now. I then went and confronted my father and said, right, we need to talk, basically. And he was a coward. Because most people, most bullies are cowards. Most bullies are cowards.
Yes.
But I wouldn't. I can understand where you're coming from, and I agree with you to a point. But then I wonder, because you've also said that he was able to live a normal life. He was married 3 times. He had a business. Blah blah blah. That sounds really patronising. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
No. I get it.
But did he not know right from wrong? Is he a psychopath? Because the psychopath doesn't have that.
There you go.
A psychopath doesn't have that I was telling you today about that criminology thing that we did at college.
Mm-hmm.
It's like I had it explained to me that this way, and if there are any people out there, which there are lots of people out there more clever and more intelligent than me, I'm probably explaining this really, really badly. But a psychopath knows the difference between right and wrong, but doesn't think it applies to them.
Oh, really?
Well, that is what we were told. I had a I was working for Manchester Youth Defending Team, and this is good. It's quite funny. This really, we had this young boy, he was 10, and he kept stealing the neighbours, the women that lived around him, around where he lived. He kept
Mm-hmm.
stealing their underwear off the washing line,
Uh,
and then he started breaking into their houses and taking their underwear. And I remember we used to do referral panels where we would get these kids with their parents, and it would be referred from court, and we would get these kids, and we would give them a referral order, which was have you heard of the word reparation?
yes.
They would have to give something back, whether it be some sort of training, whether it be write a letter of apology, whether it be some kind of community service. We would decide with the courts, and in this case we wanted him because he was only young, and we wanted him to come in and work with one of the workers and write a letter of apology, which sounds really, really like easy, but it wasn't. It was we had to sit down and we had to write it and make sure that they understand it wasn't just words on a piece of paper.
Right.
And he knew that it was wrong, but he didn't understand and couldn't work out why it was wrong for him because he felt that he could do that, and we could not make him understand that you cannot do what you're doing. And he would say, "Well, why?" So because it's wrong. But why is it wrong? Because it's stealing. But it's not stealing when I do it. So it's stealing when anyone does it. And it didn't register with this kid. And
That's scary.
yeah, and he was 10. I mean,
That's scary. That I wonder what kind of a man he grew up to be.
well, he will be a man now. He'll because it's a long time ago. He will be a man now.
Yeah. So I wonder what kind of a man he grew up to be. Is he still of that mind? I wonder. Also, I want to, in the comments, ASMR Gold wrote that she thinks people can absolutely be bad seeds. She says she also believes that some people can become bad because of their environments. The difference between a bad seed and somebody who turns bad over time would be remorse in crime or lack thereof. So that's exactly what you were talking about.
Mm.
He didn't have remorse, and not only did he not have remorse, he didn't even understand where you were coming from and how this could be wrong for him. And that feels, I I think that she's pointing out that somebody like that could be considered a bad seed.
I think it's really like when I started off. I think I started with. I can't get my words out. I started this evening and today, and you cannot, from my point of view, I don't know if you feel the same way, Chaser, that you cannot make this work in your head because you're not a psychopath or you're
Right.
not, and it doesn't um struggling for my words here, help me. It doesn't register how these people could do what they're doing, but you've got to try and think of it. Well, not try and think of it from the point of view that they're not they're not normal. They're not working like we. Their brain doesn't work the way our brain works,
Right.
which
Right.
is
That's
I mean,
actually a good point because when we're trying to think about when we're trying to think about, nature versus nurture, or what could make two children take a 2-year-old boy out and murder him, it's not, they're not thinking the way we think. And I think that's a good point. Um, that it's going to be hard for us to, and we can, like I said, like when I said, you almost feel bad that trying to take, if he was trying to make his child self feel better, you almost feel bad for the child in him that was tortured like that. Well, um, he, I really don't know what he was thinking. I really don't. And feeling
What
bad
thing?
for a serial killer. No, I don't feel. I need to make it. I need to make it very clear. I don't feel. I don't feel one bit sorry that he was, convicted or sentenced to death or any of that. I just am trying to look at. We're trying to do nature versus nurture, so I'm trying to do both sides and play devil's advocate. And on the other hand, he was severely abused as a child, and I can feel bad for that child, him as a child. That is an excuse. It's not an excuse for what he did as an adult. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense, and it's like saying in the case with Gacy, if you could have gone back in a time machine and plucked him out of that family
Yeah.
when he was being abused by his dad, and you nurtured him and you loved him and you shown him that life wasn't always this awful, and you had time with him and you gave him that nurturing that he wasn't getting, would he still have turned out the way he turned out? And that's the whole argument of nature versus nurture, isn't
Yes.
it?
Yes. Yes. Exactly. Yeah. That's interesting. It's unfortunate that we obviously cannot do that, but it is something to wonder.
Do you know you were saying you were talking with Maya?
Yeah.
Do you? I, I think this might have something to do with that. Do you think that things like films and video games and things like that have any kind of implication in the violence that we see today and people? Do you think that it causes kids to act out in a certain way?
No.
No, I don't either. I just
You
wondered.
know, kids since the beginning of time, kids would make weapons out of sticks and um you know little boys especially, you know now little girls are able to get in on it too, but they would always make weapons out of sticks and play sword fighting, or even people who don't allow a gun or a toy gun or a squirt gun in their homes, their kids are going to go outside and pick up a stick that looks like a gun and pew 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 with it. It's sort of, I I think that playing a video game is not the cause for somebody to act out violently.
Do you have you heard of the psychologist? Um, I think he's Canadian, called Jordan Peterson.
Uh-uh.
I think I've got his name right. He was saying that we're going to be facing a real big problem in years to come, because when you with your children, it's good to do things like toy fighting and rough and tumble to a
Mm-hmm.
degree, obviously not to the point where you're hurting your kids, but
Right.
it helps your children learn boundaries and learn
Uh-huh.
how when to go too far. And I know because Grace is always rough and tumbling, and we're always messing about fighting, and it was really interesting what he was saying, that we are now getting to the point that this is slightly going off serial killers, but you don't mind, do you, Tracy, if I just
No,
go
of course
5 minutes?
not. No.
We are getting to the point now, and I don't know if you agree, you've got kids, that especially boys don't know their place anymore. I think we're creating this metrosexual male who doesn't really know what his place is anymore. And I think that down the line, society's gonna struggle because it's like we don't want boys to be boys anymore. We don't encourage any kind of bad behaviour now, or rough and tumble, or boys being boys. It's to do with behaviour. It's behaviour, and it's not always to do with behaviour. It's the fact that boys are boys. Boys need to be boys. Especially in the UK, we kids at school. I don't know. It's could go. I don't want to go too far into this, but do you sort of get what I'm saying?
Well, I I get what you're saying, but I I don't see that happening. Um, my boys have always been rough and tumble. I was a rough and tumble girl. I grew up in the country and I could run faster than any boy and climb a tree faster than any boy and sword fight them. And my brother and I spent our time, you know, digging hole. We had property, and this is always a story I tell. My brother and I would go on the back of our property and dig large holes and cover it with branches to trap people in case anyone ever was wanting to sneak up to the back of our house, not actually thinking that perhaps years later we would be trapped.
But you used to you did used to dig big holes.
Yeah, booby
Have you
traps.
seen Silence of the Lambs?
we
Put the
we
lotion in the basket.
we yes, or it gets the hose again. Um, we would dig these holes for booby traps to protect our house.
Okay.
So that if anybody was going to sneak up on us, they would, be trapped. Um, and so I know boys, and my son, plays on a sport, and they're rough and tumble, and I don't think that I think what I think we're my opinion is we're just allowing girls to say it's okay that you don't have to take home ec and learn how to sew. You can go out there and get on the football team now, or the wrestling team, or whatever you want to do.
Yeah, that's a good point. That is a positive. I think it might just be like a UK thing, really. I think we're mollycoddling everybody too much, really, and we need to
Hmm.
stop doing it. I don't think it helps in the long run.
I think that well, this is way off of serial killers, but I think we should encourage kids to play outside more. You
Yeah,
know, I think the lack of that kind of play um, is that's too bad because that's where your imagination grows. When you're in front of a computer or a video game, it's not your imagination; it's the imagination of somebody else that you're playing. But I think your imagination grows by being outside and, you know, possibly hurting people who might be buried in your backyard. I don't know. I never went and checked those out later. Um, but I think that was our imagination. We would take those big huge spools that they have the telephone cords wrapped around, and we would
yeah,
take those and turn those into Star Wars, those jet fighters, and
yeah,
fight each other, and you use your imagination like that. I think that keeping the kids in the house and in front of video games is taking that away for sure.
yeah,
But anyway, uh, is it your turn for a serial killer?
yeah. I
Okay.
never thought I'd hear that. But,
Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
this one is quite recent. Well, it's quite recent, and it's one that really touched everybody's heart. Um, the Soham murders. I don't know if you've heard of the Soham murders. Soham's in Cambridgeshire,
Uh-uh.
in the UK. On the 4th of August 2002, the victims were two 10-year-old girls, Holly Marie Wells, and Jessica Chapman. They were, well, basically, they lived in a little village. Soham's a small village. The parents of both the girls were friends. We had a really nice summer that year, and the they were having a barbecue round at one of the parents' houses, and it was about 6:30 in the evening. It was in the summer, so it's still light. They asked their mum and dad could they nip to the local shop and get some sweets. So they were absolutely crazy mad Manchester United fans, and all they ever wore was Manchester United shirts all the time. And their favourite player was David Beckham. I don't know if you've heard of David Beckham.
Uh, yes.
Well,
Those of us in the United States, we do not live in caves still.
well, because the press and the media kept showing the pictures of these two little girls with the United shirts on with Beckham on the back, I think it really affected him,
Oh, yeah.
And I'll get back to the United link after that because that's not so much important. Um, the caretaker of the local school was some horrible individual called Ian Huntley. He was a caretaker at the local secondary school.
Mm-hmm.
And on the way back from the shop, after they bought the sweets, Ian Huntley was outside with his dog, and they were walking past the house, and they sort of let on saying like, "Hello, Mr. Huntley," or whatever. And he said, "Can you two girls just come inside for a second?" And they said, "Why?" He said, and his wife was a teaching assistant, or his girlfriend was a teaching assistant, Maxine Carr, in their class. Do you have teaching assistants in America?
Yes.
Yeah. Um, she. So he said that the Maxine was in the house and wanted to see the girls. So the girls went into the house. Now she wasn't there. She'd gone to visit her parents up in Grimsby. So once he got them in the house, he killed them in the bathroom. No one knows why he killed them. He hasn't said why he killed them, but he just decided that for whatever reason. Now his background was again pretty ordinary.
Mm.
Quite middle class really. He wasn't. He didn't really have any kind of criminal record or anything like that. And he was it was a little smart bloke. Do you know one of them blokes that you look at and you just think, "Oh, I don't like you."
Yes.
He's one of them. He's just not a very nice not a very nice person.
Mm-hmm.
Now, oh, Maxine Carr was his girlfriend. Obviously, she wasn't there um, when he took the girls in, and
Mm-hmm.
she came home from visiting her parents in Grimsby, and she gave him an alibi. He
Oh
told
my
her
goodness.
because he took the bodies and dumped the bodies of the
Mm.
two little girls. They were beautiful little girls as well, and he took at the bodies and got rid of the bodies, and then he told Maxine Carr. She gave him an alibi. When the TV cameras are down there, they interviewed him. They actually interviewed this tosspot,
Mm.
and he was saying that he's been helping with the search and it's terrible, and he didn't really know the girls, but his girlfriend did, and he stood there and lied, completely lied.
Wow.
And I mean, you can still go online and on YouTube, and if you want. Oh, anyway, he's just a horrible person. Excuse me, I was just getting a drink. Now, one of the girls' dads, I think it was Jessica Chapman, he wrote a book and he started a charity. And all the proceeds from the book went um, to this charity. He didn't write the book, so he wasn't sort of doing it for money for himself. Um, After everything, the girls were found and the bodies, and they had the funerals and everything. They had like massive, massive funerals. And this might sound a bit ridiculous, but Manchester United invited the whole of both families up to the ground up to watch a football match, and they raised some money for his charity. And it was the saddest thing I've ever seen in my life. Was this guy with everybody applauding him they do like a minute's applause now instead of a minute's silence.
Right.
And this guy, all he wanted to do was, it would have been his dream to take his daughter and a friend to this football match, and he couldn't because of this piece of shit.
Right.
Sorry for swearing. And I don't know why. He said that he said that one of them fell out. I mean, he's come up with different. He's a transvestite now, by the way, in prison. I think he got 48 years. She got 40 months. 40 months she got.
Wow.
For I mean, anyway, he's a transvestite now. He dresses as a woman in prison. He's in a hospital. He's not in a prison. He's in Broadmoor, I think. And that's something else that I don't agree with. These people should be put in normal prisons in the general population. They shouldn't be mollycoddled in hospitals. And sorry,
Right.
That might make me sound really, really cruel, and I don't mean to, but I just don't agree with that at all. Just don't agree with it at all.
Yeah, I think most serial killers, famous serial killers, are put in different not in the general population of prisoners because of their fame. They figure that they'll be attacked, which is fine.
Yeah.
Nobody gave their victims that option. You know, these serial killers didn't give their victims the option of not being attacked. So I agree about that. And you don't know anything about his childhood.
Well, I looked today and there was nothing. It was just normal, nothing special. Just he was one of these people that people don't remember him. He was that insignificant.
Right.
He had parents. His parents were quite a lot older than maybe normal parents. That doesn't make sense. So they had him when they were a little bit older,
Right.
than maybe sort of in the 30s or
Right.
in mid-30s, and she came from a really good family. His girlfriend. But what I was thinking about today, if he hadn't have got convicted and caught, because they sort of had an inkling it was him, and when he did the interview on telly, they were analysing all his body language and things like that, and they sort of, they sort of knew it was him anyway. But if he hadn't have been, if they had never found him out who had done it and he got away with it, would she have kept quiet forever?
Yeah.
Where would that, could that have been sort of maybe another sort of Moore's murders scenario.
Right.
That's
Did
what.
she ever say why she covered for him?
No, no. I think she tried to say that she was scared of him, but Grace is bigger than him, so I don't think that made much sense. Grace is my 10-year-old daughter, by the way, not just a random Grace off the street. It's
Just a random Grace. Huh.
I just worry about about the American listeners might wonder what the bleeding hell's he talking about.
They probably do anyway.
Yeah, most people do in England.
Okay, I'm going to talk about Jeffrey Dahmer.
Ooh, lighting things up.
Yeah, let's light this up a little bit. Okay, so Jeffrey Dahmer was born in 1960. They say that he killed 17 males, but it's thought that he may have killed more. He admitted to killing 17. He was born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. He was described. Now here's a strange thing about that happened to him. So he was born to two parents, and he lived in a happy home. And
To two parents.
Well, not a single mother. I mean, not a single mother. Yeah, it's so weird. Two parents. Anyway, um, so he was described by everybody as being a totally normal child until he was 4 years old, and he had to have surgery. He had a hernia, and when he came out of surgery, his family and people who know him say that he was a completely different child. That he would sulk. He withdrew from his family. He withdrew from his brothers. And by the time that he was a teenager, he was very tense person who didn't have any friends. And so eventually his parents did get divorced, but being his childhood was normal except for this one blip that happened, that he was a different child before surgery than he was afterwards. He claims that his compulsions towards necrophilia and murdering started around the age of 14, which is when his parents got divorced. But he would engage in activity with dead bodies. He obviously ate his victims. His father and his stepmother went to every one of his court dates. His father was still there supporting him. And when the jury convicted him, they convicted him saying that not only was he guilty, but he was completely sane and knew right from wrong. It only took them 10 hours to come back with their verdict. And for those of you that don't know, there was a man who escaped from Jeffrey Dahmer's apartment one night, and the cops found him, and he told them the story of what had happened. Jeffrey Dahmer came out and completely charmed them, and they sent this boy back into his house, and he was one of his victims. So
you know you're having a bad day when that happens, don't you?
like we were talking about
Run out of
yesterday.
their house to see the police and think, I'm saved. Let me take you back.
It's like a bad movie, isn't it? And they're like, he's like, he's beating me, he's sexually assaulting me, and I think he might eat me. And they're like, awesome, go back. Yeah, it's so bizarre. It's and of course, the cops, you know, caught hell because of that, because they had a victim right in their own hands. There's a woman who lived across the hall from him, and he would make her sandwiches. Um, I know,
God.
and she has been on TV several times saying that she's afraid that she ate a human, and just no. Um, I he now so could something have happened to him? Could something have happened to him when he was in surgery? And I'll say this: I spoke last week about having a daughter who has a Tourette syndrome, and she, when my daughter she had surgery at 3 years old, and when she woke up from surgery, that is the day that her tics started. That her Tourette's came out full blown. So I know that things can change with anesthesia, but can you? I mean, at 4, if your family notices that you are a distinctly different child before surgery than you were when you came out, did something happen to him?
It's I don't know. I mean, I have just watched a film called My My Friend Dharma.
Uh huh.
I don't know if you've seen it.
I think it's on Netflix.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Um, his dad was a chemist, weren't he?
Yeah.
And he had a little shed, didn't he, Jeffrey? And
Yes.
he used to find animals that were dead,
Animals. Yes.
and he would put them in the acid so he could get the bones,
Right.
and then it got. I think it progressed, didn't it, from there to him. He started killing animals
Right.
and doing it, and then um, obviously it progressed onto people when he got
Right.
old. But in the film, he was portrayed as just a shy young lad, just a shy man.
Mm-hmm.
Quite polite, quite.
Yes.
But he wanted to make. He wanted to, from what I've read as well. Didn't he want? I shouldn't be laughing. He wanted to make like a sex zombie slave type thing.
Yes.
That
Yes.
and that's why
Yes.
he was doing some of the things that he was doing.
Yeah. Yeah. He was he was crazy as hell. Yeah, that's what he wanted to do, and so he thought he was doing experiments with bodies and putting body parts together, and he would have uh, relationships with these bodies. And they found his freezer packed with body parts. Um, he would go to gay bars and pick these boys up, these young men up, um, bring them back to his apartment, and then kill them and cut them up and eat them. I think that's I think that's beyond the pale of your average mental illness.
Well, I don't
But
understand the whole. I mean, if this sleeping with the dead bodies is just, or not sleeping with, having
yeah, I
sex
know.
with the, it's just beyond reason, really.
Yeah, it it doesn't. Yeah, I don't. I can't get my mind around it.
My friend, one of my old girlfriends actually, back in Manchester, her sister's friend um, got really poorly. Her husband started working at the hospital in the morgue. He was like an assistant in the morgue, and she started getting really, really ill. So she went to her doctors, and it was down where her private parts were. And they took some smear tests, and they took some whatever they do down there. And she got a phone call to go back to the doctors, and she got to the doctors, and there was a police detective in the surgery waiting to speak to her. And she was like, "What's happening? What's going on here?" He said, "Well, we've had your results back, and you've got this disease, and I can't remember what the disease is called." And she went, "So why is there a detective here?" She says, "Well, the only way you can get this disease is by sleeping with a dead body. Is having sex with a dead body,
Oh.
and it's sort of it can't be cured. This disease, supposedly at the time. This was a few years ago, and he had started work. He was a normal, for all intents and purposes, a normal person. He had two kids, a boy and a girl, and he went out with his friends. He was normal sort of middle classish type guy, and he started working at the morgue and decided that when he was on nights, he would have sex with the
Mm.
bodies, and he'd got this disease on
Mm.
himself, and
Mm.
he'd give it to his wife. He got locked up, locked away. So, I,
Oh my gosh.
it,
Ugh.
no, that's exactly my reaction when I first heard it. It's
Oh, I'm never gonna get that out of my brain.
sorry,
I need a bleach bath, please. Quickly, somebody. Oh,
it's
okay.
just so it's just so
I
many
don't
things.
get it. There's
I mean,
there's a lot of weird people. That. Mm.
what would possess you? I mean, let's try and think about this rationally. You know, how could you find it? I mean, especially was it Bundy you were saying that was
Yeah.
not only was he sleeping with he's not sleeping with, I shouldn't say that, it's like
Yes.
having sex. Pretty much the body, from what I could gather from what you were saying, these bodies were in pretty bad in the stage of decomposition.
Yeah, he would have relationships with them until they were putrefied.
Oh,
And yeah. Mm. Ugh.
sorry,
You
everybody.
know, yeah, sorry we went down that road. Everybody just went, okay, moving on. But what's weird? I mean, no, no. I gotta stop saying what's weird because it's all weird. Um, so, the his defense was that he was insane, and the jury found that he was not insane. So he was well aware of right and wrong and what he was doing, and this was just his way. So he had a normal childhood, so I'm guessing nurture had nothing to do with it. I'm gonna go with nature on this one.
Can I
His
just say something before we go on to any more?
Yeah.
You know what we haven't looked at in any of these cases? How would you
Mm.
be if it was your child?
Oh,
You know,
yeah.
you've
Yeah, like
tried
his father
bring,
went every day and to court and everything and heard all that testimony. Ugh.
you try to bring your child up the best way you can. Then this happens. How how must the parents feel. They must feel devastated. They
Oh
must feel
yeah.
devastated.
Oh, yeah, I can't. In some of these cases, the parents were obviously abusive. Some of them they were not. And for Jeffrey Dahmer's father to go to court every day and sit through everything that was said, and I mean, he clearly loved his son very much. But you have to wonder. I think you would wonder, like, what did I do wrong?
Oh
Where
yeah,
where did this
well,
go wrong? And what did I totally miss? Like, okay, I'm going to talk about my brother. Jory has talked about his uncle Mike. My brother had the stereotypical signs that you are supposed to look out for serial killer. He would kill and torture animals, and he, if his mouth was open, he was lying. He just had some weird other things that went along with him, and he didn't end up a serial killer, to the best of my knowledge. But my dad now says if he had been if my brother turned out to be a serial killer, he would not have been surprised at all. But he didn't. They took him to doctors, and he was on medication, and they didn't know what else to do above and beyond that. So what could Jeffrey Dahmer's parents have actually done to stop this from happening? What can any parent actually do? Because you can't, until they've committed this crime, you can't imprison them for it. Even thinking about it, you can't commit somebody for a thought crime. So what can you do as a parent? Of course you'd feel responsible, but then again, what could you have done? If this is who they are, it's going to be who they are.
yeah, yeah. You would be so shocked, and you'd have to. I think. Well, you'd have to blame yourself to some degree, wouldn't you? Well, I think I would.
I would, yeah, sure I would. I think I would just go over every little thing and think, well, what if I had noticed? What if I had thought? But then again, as you're raising if you're a normal family and you're raising your kids, and if my child took an interest in making skeletons out of birds or whatever, I would not leap to future serial killer who eats his victims. You
No,
know, I wouldn't at all. And in fact, I don't even think I would think that was I would think, oh, I wouldn't want to do that, but I wouldn't think that was even something crazy. That maybe they're going to grow up and they're going to be a scientist or a doctor. You know, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. Hopefully, I'll never have to find that out, Maya. Try not to become a serial killer. Okay. Should we move along from eating people onto something else, Rob?
well, I'm gonna do the most famous serial killer probably in the world,
Okay.
Jack the Ripper,
Yes.
and I have to admit that you were right today and I was wrong,
Oh.
and you will
Oh.
find out why in a minute.
Okay.
You're going to be very smug in a
I
minute.
am.
Jack the Ripper, Jack the Ripper's murder. God, what is wrong with me? Jack the Ripper murders occurred in the East End of London in 1888 in the area called Whitechapel, which is still there's still a Whitechapel part of the East End in London now. Nowadays, now there is so much that has been written about Jack the Ripper, and there was so much. I'll give you a little bit of a brief sort of Whitechapel. Whitechapel was pretty much the slums of London. It was the lowest of the low.
Mm-hmm.
People were sharing rooms. Families, 9 to 10 people, were sharing a small room to live. There was crime. There was prostitution. It wasn't somewhere you'd want to go or want to be, which was quite unusual because at the time it was when the British Commonwealth was the richest in the world, and the Commonwealth was all over the world. The crown was everywhere, but this part of London was basically, sorry to swear, it was a shithole, pretty much. Now, there are lots of theories of who Jack the Ripper was because he was never caught. Now, one chain of thought is in the 1800s, a lot of Polish Jews came over to London to get out of Russia because Russia pretty much was in charge of everything over that in the Eastern Europe. So there was lots and lots of Polish Jews came over, and a gentleman called John Comiskey, who was a tailor, if I'm not mistaken, he was a suspect, but he was in and out of mental institutions. And when one of the murders occurred, he was Kaminsky was institutionalized. Now, Tracy, Dr.
Yes.
H. Holmes, an American doctor
Mm-hmm.
who had the hotel. He had the hotel, didn't he? The hotel of death kind of thing, where had those trapdoors and acid baths and all sorts of malarkey. He was believed to have fled the USA and came to England, and because it was believed that the way that the bodies were mutilated and the organs removed, that it was someone who had medical knowledge and was able to remove the organs. It wasn't. I read today that it was described as a methodical frenzy or something like that.
Wow.
But it was, I mean, just to find the liver, to remove the liver
Right.
was difficult. And you got to bear in mind he was doing all this in the dark.
Oh, yeah.
Now, the most famous one is Prince Albert Edward Victor, Duke of Clarence. He was Queen Victoria's grandson. He was known as Eddie. Now, Eddie had syphilis, or allegedly had syphilis, and he was partial to the odd prostitute.
Mm-hmm.
Not to eat not to eat them, but to visit
Thank
prostitutes.
goodness.
Just to get that clear, because the
Yeah.
way the night's gone. And he was said to be a suspect. But there is something else, which is he was believed to have, and it's quite ironic this because of the royal wedding, which is happening this weekend.
Right.
He was believed to have married a Catholic girl, and that couldn't have happened. It was a no in the 1800s, and
Oh.
the serial killings were not serial killings. They were the girl that he was going to marry was a prostitute or had been a prostitute. And she had some friends, and the friends were all the girls that were murdered, all the ladies that were murdered. I think there was 4 or 5 of them. and it was believed on some quarters that the murders were made to look like the work of a serial killer, but it was actually to get rid of anybody that knew what had happened and that she had married a Catholic and that he had married a Catholic lady, and it was all a big scam by and the Masons were involved, and it was
Oh,
to do
really?
with Islamic lodges, and it's really, really deep. And
Really?
yeah,
I'm glad that you brought this part up because, like I had told you, um, in the United States, well, uh, most of us, I would say, didn't realize that in the UK they believed there was a royal family connection
yeah,
to. So that I'm glad you're talking about this.
but when we're talking about conspiracies today, um, I could believe that actually, as far fetched as it might sound, I wouldn't be shocked.
Uh huh.
I mean, you could go down the line to later Princess Diana. I mean, there's all stuff
Right.
similar that she was supposedly pregnant with to a Muslim, and the Queen had her knocked off.
Right.
And it wouldn't surprise me what goes on, um, but no one will ever know. And Jack the Ripper, or supposedly Jack the Ripper, was sending letters to the press, and
Yes.
some of the letters were very articulate, which was, there's a lot most people couldn't read and write. So
Right.
it was more that's what made it more likely to be someone from who had an education, an educated person. But
Mm-hmm.
uh, a lot of people at the time thought that an educated person wouldn't ever do anything like this. There was a
Mm-hmm.
lot of prejudice um, between the social, between the poor, the classes. An educated upper class person could never commit this kind of atrocity. But
Mm-hmm.
it really, yeah, everything points to the fact that it was a doctor or a surgeon, sorry, or maybe even a butcher
Mm-hmm.
or a tailor. I don't know how
Right.
Taylor had got anything to do with it, but um, unless he was going to make a suit out of the skin, but that's going way off course again.
Yeah. I, maybe it's just because they know like body measurements so well and stuff. So,
Yeah.
maybe in the dark they'd be able to know just by body measurements where the liver would be or something. I don't know.
Um, what do Americans think about this H. Holmes scenario? Because I said that now I'd heard that someone could have gone from England to America
Mm-hmm.
after committing the crimes. That's why he was never caught. And you
Uh-huh.
said today that you'd heard it the other way around, which reluctantly as I am to say, you were right. I mean, wasn't he caught, H. Holmes?
Yeah, he was caught. Yeah, have you ever heard of the television show American Horror Story?
Yeah.
Okay, well, on one of their seasons, they did American Horror Story Hotel, and the
Tracy, you've
hotel.
done it again.
What?
You've done it
What?
again. I've been
I
watching it all
did.
afternoon.
Are you kidding me?
No, I've been watching the second one about the bloody insane asylum.
Yeah. Okay, well, eventually you're gonna come up to the to hotel,
Yeah.
and that the hotel is based on H. Holmes, and the way he made his hotel was secret hidden rooms. Sorry if I'm blowing anything for people who haven't seen it yet, but it's based on H. Holmes's hotel.
Yeah, Lady Gaga's in it, isn't she?
Yes, she is.
Yeah.
Yeah, that the first. This is okay. This is way off topic. The first three seasons of American Horror Story are my favorite, and then after that, for me, it just takes a nosedive hard.
That last one was really, really bad. That election thingy one.
Yeah, I stopped watching that. I think I watched 3 episodes and then I stopped. So, yeah, I like the first 3 seasons, and then after that, I forced myself to watch, and then I finally said that's enough. But I don't think that H. Holmes is very. Mm, I think that more modern day serial killers are the subject of stuff here. I don't think he's nearly as famous as like a Jeffrey Dahmer or a John Wayne Gacy.
Was Jack the
Um,
Ripper?
well, Jack the Ripper is very famous, obviously, everywhere. But I think the fascinating and frustrating part about Jack the Ripper is that we will never know.
Well,
So,
there's a movie. If there was a really, really good movie with Johnny Depp um, called In Hell or From Hell, and he plays De- Detective Adeline, I think if that's the right name, who was
mhm,
the main detective that was on the Ripper case,
right.
and um, that is a good film. If you ever get a chance to watch it, it's really, really good.
Yeah, I
And
think I did see it. And Jory is in the chat saying that there is evidence showing that H. Holmes was Jack the Ripper, which completely makes sense. I mean, that was right down his alley, so to speak, and being a doctor and everything.
yeah, I didn't know he was a doctor.
Yeah, crazy. Okay, uh, I'm going to do one now, and I think I'm going to do the Green River Killer,
Okay.
and who is Gary Ridgway, and then I'm going to tell my very small but strange connection to the Green River Killer. Well, no, not to him, but to the investigation. So, Gary Ridgway was born in 1949, and he was born in Utah, but they moved to Seattle, and he lived in a very poor section of Seattle by SeaTac Airport. He was tested with an IQ of just 82. He repeated a year of school twice. Because of that, he had difficulties in school. Um, but despite being slow academically, he had a lot of friends. He was very popular. Everybody seemed to like him. He had 2 siblings, and he had a very violent relationship with his mother growing up. His mother and him would get into violent physical fights. Gary was still wetting the bed into his teenage years, and that would cause his mother to belittle him and embarrass him in front of his friends. Um, he said that he felt at once sexually attracted to his mother and also that he hated his mother.
Oh, God.
Yeah. His father was a bus driver, but he worked part time in a mortuary, and he would tell Gary stories when Gary was young. He would tell Gary stories about his co-workers engaging in necrophilia with the bodies.
Unbelievable.
I know.
What are you
So
kids, man?
I, yeah, I so after high school, Gary went to Vietnam, and when he came back, he got a job painting trucks, which he held that job for 30 years. By all accounts, he was a reliable, good employee, got along with everybody. He was also a religious fanatic. He was married 3 times. He was a religious fanatic who insisted on like sexual intercourse having to be through a sheet, and his wives had to dress a certain way, but he was also frequenting prostitutes the whole time he was married.
Can I
He
just
would,
stop you there?
yes,
I think I might have heard something wrong. Did you say sexual intercourse through a sheet?
yes,
A
like a hole
sheet?
in a sheet. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Sorry, I've never heard that before.
yeah, yeah. Um, I heard they used to do that like in like Victorian times too.
I don't know. I've never heard that
I don't
before.
know. I don't know. I'm not going. I'm not. I don't know. I, I don't know. Anyway, um, so he started murdering people in 1982, and he was caught in 2001. He admitted to killing between 75 and 80 women prostitutes that he had frequented and picked up um, in Washington State. The thing is about the Green River Killer is that he the prostitutes he killed, he tried to get women who would look like his mother. He also admitted that he had an interest in necrophilia. If I have to disagree with Ted Bundy here for a second. I think a lot of these serial killers, what they have in common is necrophilia, which
Yeah.
is strange that. Um, but he lived a completely normal life, other than the fact, well, okay, after he got back from Vietnam and he, you know, was married and everything, but like I said, he was married several times because the women just could not keep up with how religiously strict he was. Ironically, he was also murdering people and seeing prostitutes and was married 3 times. So his religious strictness seemed to apply only to the women he was married to, certainly not himself. And that he kept a job, lived a normal life according to people he worked with. They saw him as being a totally normal person who was able to keep a job and function for 30 years. Um, but he was caught only from DNA evidence. They had luckily saved the DNA evidence, and that's the only way that he was caught because he never left any, um, obviously, any witnesses. No, none of these prostitutes. They were. Here's my connection. No, I wasn't a prostitute. Um, I know you thought I was going there, didn't you, Rob? You're gonna like. And here's where
Wondered
she
where,
tells another
I
weird
wondered where
story
I
about
was going.
herself. Um, so here's my strange connection to the Green River Killer. So they not only kept an eye on prostitutes in Seattle, but they kept an eye on prostitutes and who frequented prostitutes in Spokane, Washington, which is where I grew up, and in other cities as well. They would write down the license plates and do background checks on these men and see how often they were there and if there was any murders committed. So strangely enough, he wasn't caught in any of those traps. However, my neighbor's best friend was. And one day I was sitting on my porch and 15 police cars pulled up outside of our house, and they went in and took my neighbor's best friend. His name was Brian. Not my neighbor, the friend. So the neighbor and I, his name was Doug. We were very, very close friends. but this had been his best friend before I had met him. And we had socialized, hung out. I knew him what I thought to be very well. My best friend dated him, and they arrested him on suspicion that he was the Green River Killer.
That's crazy.
Yeah. So for a few, several days, the police told us that he was being arrested under the idea that he could be the Green River Killer. So for several days, we spent like going over every waking minute that we'd ever known this guy, thinking how crazy it would be that we would know the Green River Killer. And the thing is that they obviously let him go eventually, and he wasn't the Green River Killer, but there was more to picking him up than just using prostitutes. So nobody was ever friends with this guy again, obviously, because there was more to picking him up than just the prostitutes. So they would have been picking everybody up. There was, you know, and they brought 15 cars to pick this man up. So we knew that something above and beyond the regular, and I just said regular use of a prostitute was wrong with this man.
There's no smoke without fire, is there?
Yeah. And so there is my small and crazy connection to the Green River Killer, who could have been living across the street from me. Ugh. So with this guy, I'm gonna also go with I'm gonna go with nurture. Something his family life was crazy. It, from what I understand, his mother knew that he had this attraction to her. She would spank him as a punishment as a teen for wetting the bed. Um, his father with the whole necrophilia thing going on. Uh, Obviously, this did not make him be a serial killer, but I do believe there was the makings of that brewing already.
It's just people. I don't know. People are just. I don't accept that. You've always got a choice, haven't you?
Yeah.
Whenever whatever troubles you've been through. I mean, look at these. I'm not going to use myself as an example because I do it all the time. But look at all these lads coming home from Afghanistan and the Gulf and what they've seen and what they've had to do. And, some of them could have come from bad backgrounds and had difficult childhoods. And they've seen terrible things over there. And maybe they've had to kill people.
Yes.
They don't come home and start murdering children and sleeping with dead bodies.
Yeah.
There's always a choice. There is always that choice, yes or no,
That's
wrong
right.
and right.
Yes.
And I think it's too easy to just keep blaming. I think it's just too easy just to keep blaming someone's social background and where they're from or what they did or what their parents did. We've all got a history. I read a book once, and I've been trying to get this book again. And if you ever come across it, it's called Victims of Victims.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really, really good. It looks at this, how we, like what you were saying before, that we basically act out, parts of our life that I think it's the first 4 years of your life are really important. And you can, obviously, you're still a baby type thing there. You're still a baby, a toddler, 4. But then your life can go round and round in these 4-year periods. So if you saw a lot of abuse, or if you were abused, this book says that you will keep reliving this. Now I don't, like I said, I don't agree with that at all, but it really goes in depth into it's like, for instance, and this is completely changing the subject, it's like the woman who keeps getting herself into bad relationships. Every relationship she has is abusive, and she goes from one relationship to another relationship.
Yeah.
And when we were doing our I did a counselling diploma, and we used this as like a case study. And one of the first things that the tutor said was, well, you were trying to find out where this person is meeting a future partner, a boyfriends or partners. And she said, well, I'm meeting them in nightclubs or in bars or in whatever. And try and make this person understand that there's the pattern. If you meet someone in a library, they're probably going to be less likely to kick the shit out of you than if you meet someone in a bar.
I'm sorry.
What?
I believe that that's a good life lesson there.
I'm trying to be really serious. I'm trying to raise this up a bit.
That's true, though.
But if you think about it a little bit, it's, she couldn't understand, this woman hypothetically couldn't understand why every boyfriend she has or every partner she has,
right,
it's just this pattern. You need to break the pattern. And
right, but then again, maybe the type of man she's looking for is somebody who's a pull you by the hair, I'm a man, and those are the kind she's attracted to, and those are the kind that are beating the shit out of her.
Yeah, there's that way of looking at it as well. But you've got to think to yourself, is there a way to break? There's hundreds of ways you can break that cycle. There's give up drinking, give up whatever you're doing, change your social circles. There's lots and lots of different things.
Right.
But what I'm trying to say is, you can't keep blaming.
Yeah.
If you can't keep blaming everything else, if you're carrying on the same behavior.
Right. Yep.
Which basically, if you want to put that down to the serial killers, they have a choice. If they choose to behave that way, they could think, well, I have seen a lot of shit when I was growing up. I have been abused. I don't want to put myself through that, or put my children through that, or put my partner through that. I want to be 100% different than the way I was brought up. I mean, I like I said to before, I would never ever and have never hit a woman, but I have been in lots of scraps with blokes, and in a way, because it sounds like I'm making an excuse now. I hate that. Because my dad was this so-called hard man, and everybody was scared of him.
Mm-hmm.
I ended up getting to the point where I had to stop and think, I hate my dad. I hate him, but I am turning into him,
Right.
and I had to make a conscious decision to say, well, no, I don't want to be like that. I want to, you know, I don't want to be this violent person. And I then decided that, like we were talking about choices, I realised that sort of coming out of the army that I had no qualifications, could hardly read or write.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, well, I need to do something about this. And it's the same for my sister, my other sister Claire. She didn't go to school much. She had to go back to school in her 30s, into college, and get all her English and her maths, and she's got everything now.
Mm-hmm.
And she's done really, really well. And I had to do the same thing, because I wanted to break that cycle. Now, I could have just gone down the road of being basically a thug. And at the end of the day, I couldn't turn around and say, if I really, really hurt somebody, well, it's because I had a bad childhood. Because that doesn't work in court when you, believe me, I've tried it, it doesn't.
Right.
Sorry,
Yeah.
that got really deep then. I didn't mean it to go really,
Oh,
really deep.
oh, we're having a conversation. I'm not, I'm not, I'm not saying in his case that nurture is his excuse. I'm saying that I think that this guy from the get-go who thought it was okay to have a sexual attraction to his mother, then to have a mother who um, didn't really discourage it, you know what I mean? And a father who was also weird, I'm talking about
Yeah,
necrophilia. I think that that could be his, not his excuse, but definitely he was in a family that wasn't discouraging his behavior, I guess is how I should word it. They weren't saying we should probably go see a psychiatrist. You know what I mean?
yeah,
And and then he just, took the leap on his own. He was not found to be insane. Um, but I think that all I'm saying is that he did not live in a family who did anything to help him not be who he became. Is what I'm saying. Not that it's an excuse of why he became the person he did, just that he didn't have. I mean,
yeah. I know what you
if he
mean.
okay even if he had been taken into a different house, let's say like we had talked about, try and travel, go back into a different house, he's still the kind of person who felt attracted to his own mother. So I don't think that's going to change that. I think that he's from the get-go was built wrong. There was
Yeah.
it was he was wrong.
Have you seen and it's something that really creeps me out, the television series of the Bates Motel?
No, I haven't seen it.
Well, it's basically based on Psycho, the
Right.
Hitchcock film,
Yeah.
and the house looks the same and the motel looks the same. And it's the mum is the lady who
Yeah.
plays. Have you seen The Conjuring?
Yes.
She
Yep.
she plays the mum, and obviously the two, there's a brother and then a stepbrother, but the younger brother is Norman Bates,
Mm-hmm.
and some of the scenes in that I found really, really disturbing, and it was just the way um, he would be lying on his bed asleep, and she would come in and get on the bed with him and cuddle up with him. And he's
Mm-hmm.
like a 15, 16-year-old boy. And I found it so difficult to watch that. I
Mm-hmm.
just, it's just, ooh, I don't like it. I
Yeah, well,
just
that's a
really,
normal
really,
person's reaction.
yeah.
So,
Because I never had that kind of, I mean,
mm-mm.
I don't know, maybe I never had that kind of relationship with my mum. but
Well,
just
no,
to
I don't
see
think
it,
most people do.
she was she was talking to him like he was her husband,
Ugh.
and it was um there were no boundaries. That's what I was looking for. There was no, you know, it's so important, isn't it, as a parent to set boundaries for your children. And
Right.
it's one of the words I've tried to think of tonight, and I think it applies to everybody we've talked about.
Yeah.
They didn't have the right boundaries. There's no
Yeah.
boundaries there,
Right.
and
Well,
oh,
about the mother-son thing, biologically speaking, psychiatry says that, there's a certain age, it's like 12, 13, that boys start to like smell musky. Ask any mother of a boy who's over that age, and they're going to tell you that boys get to this point where they're like stink to their mother. And they
what?
say that, yeah, they smell this musky smell. And I have never known a mother of a son who didn't say, oh, they're at that stage where, and psychiatry says that that is biologically separating a mother from her son so that those types of relationships don't happen. It comes where a mother goes, ugh, you
Yeah,
smell. And so I think that nature is naturally steps in and takes that role and saying, you're separating now. You're at the age where you're separating.
yeah.
So it has to go very wrong for it, to have a son to and a mother to have that kind of a weird relationship because biologically mothers are geared and to back away from our sons at that age.
Well, listen to this. Sorry to interrupt you, Tracy.
It's
How
okay.
do you feel about this? I watched a documentary a couple of years back now, and if there's anyone listening from the UK, you'll probably remember this documentary. It was about this woman, and she had he was 12 or 13 years old, and he was at school, obviously. He would come home and breastfeed, and she was still
Uh,
breastfeeding this kid. And he would come home and basically he would suckle on his mum, and he was 11, 12, or 13 years old.
can I tell you something? This podcast is going to be the reason why I do not get monetized. They're going to listen to this and they're going to be like, there is no way this channel's going to be monetized. That's crazy.
Honestly,
No,
honestly,
no.
I swear to God, this kid, because I remember
Mm.
it was one of those things that knocked me sick, but I couldn't believe it. And they showed, obviously, do you know when they blur it out,
Yes.
you couldn't actually see her boob.
Oh gosh.
But this kid came home in his school uniform
Oh gosh.
and
No.
started breastfeeding. I mean, how is I can't even imagine what must have been going on at school. Because if I'd have just got the shit kicked out of me. But I mean, I oh. Now,
Can we just start talking about people killing people now?
yeah, we better haven't we? Because I don't know how we've gone to that. It's your fault.
I hope
It's
not.
it's your channel.
Won't be for long. If you come back here tomorrow, I probably won't have one. Okay, do you have another one you want to talk about? Because
Well,
I only have one more.
I was just going to briefly. I haven't really done any notes on this. It's just we were talking about Jack the Ripper, but we had. Have you heard of the Yorkshire Ripper?
No.
He was a. This was in the 70s, through the 70s to the early 80s, I think. He was a lorry driver. Peter Sutcliffe, he was called. He used to. Um, he had a pretty normal childhood again. he was married to Sonia, a lady called Sonia Sutcliffe, and he used to visit prostitutes. We have a red light. Well, everywhere's got one, haven't they? We have a red light area in Manchester, and he he would be picking prostitutes up from Manchester, and I think he was from Leeds or Sheffield in Yorkshire, and he would pick prostitutes up all over the show. And these women started going missing, then they were found dead, and he would basically do the kind of things. He would just smash them to pieces with a hammer, and he would just beat them and kill them, rape them, kill them, and I think he did it to 17 or 18 ladies. A couple of them he thought were prostitutes and they weren't prostitutes. And I can remember him, the police, he got picked up about 3 times and got away with it. The police let him off, just give him a warning. And I can always remember this as a kid, not being allowed to play out. I know, obviously, I wasn't a prostitute when I was a kid, and I wasn't a female.
You waited till you got older?
No, I did that in my late 20s. I had a sex change, and I walked in the street.
The 20s are for experimenting.
Yeah. I've lost my chain of thought now.
I'm so sorry.
I'll just bang my foot as well. I remember the streets being absolutely deserted at night because everybody was scared to go out, and women would, come sort of 6 o'clock. That was it. You would never see a woman out on her own. Women, it was crazy. I can always remember because he was picking the girls up from around Manchester and around North Manchester, where I'm from, and the Yorkshire Ripper.
Well, somebody, so Mad Meerkat, he lives in the UK, and he wrote Peter William Sutcliffe. Who is that?
He was Jack the Ripper. Not Jack the Ripper, the Yorkshire Ripper.
Yorkshire Ripper. Okay.
Yeah.
And they caught him.
They got him. Yeah, they got him in the end. But they had him a couple of times. They'd stopped him because obviously they were checking the registration numbers, the registration plates for the cars that were picking up prostitutes, and he was picking them up in his lorry. We picked someone up. He was a lorry driver. I think I said he was a lorry driver.
What's a lorry?
Sorry, a truck, a wagon. Like a big
truck driver. Oh, like a semi truck. Oh, okay, got it. Yeah.
Yeah, we call them lorries. Sorry.
Okay. Oh, I got it.
And they picked him up a couple of times, and he talked his way out of it somehow, and because he was committing crimes in different areas, because Manchester's in Lancashire, and Yorkshire, Sheffield and Leeds are in Yorkshire. Now, because the two police forces didn't share information, because obviously it wasn't like digital and like it is today, because he was able to sort of slip through the net, I think, and people weren't putting 2 and 2 together to realise who he actually was. But yeah, he got found. He's still in prison now. He's had a bad time in prison. I don't think he's actually in prison. I think he was in like a hospital type prison hospital called Broadmoor. I think he's actually in a normal prison now. I know he's been slashed across his face a few times. But yeah, that was a terrible.
Do you have the death penalty there?
No, we used to. It was it 1969? I think the last time someone was hung. No, we should have the death penalty. We should. I would bring it back tomorrow.
Really.
If
Yeah.
if someone raped or killed a child, if
Yep.
you knew 1,000,000% that this was the person that did it, I wouldn't
Hmm.
give a shit about what his excuses or reasons were. I'd just hang the bugger.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I think that I'm not going to go into the death penalty thing, but yes, I agree with that. And well, okay, I'll say this: I think that child molesters um, should go ahead and be able to be sentenced to the death penalty too. Now, my producer Jeremy is probably going to cut my sound off in a minute because he doesn't agree with the death penalty. So I'm not going to talk about it anymore, so I can keep having my podcasts. Um, I'm going to talk about one more. I was going to do two more, but I'm not going to. I'm going to skip the last one because I talked about him last week. And I don't want to talk about him this week.
Okay.
So I'm going to do the woman, and
Yeah.
her name is Eileen Warnos, and Eileen was born in 1956. She had a very, very bad childhood. Her father killed himself while he was in prison for being a child molester.
Oh God.
She was abandoned by her mother, um, her and her brother. Her mother allowed them to be raised by her grandparents, and her grandfather was an abusive alcoholic who um, molested her as well. And she began to have a sexual relationship with her brother. She became pregnant, put the child up for adoption, and then was kicked out of her house, of her grandparents' house, and she had to live in the woods. So she became a prostitute, and she would kill um, men who would pick her up, or she would hitchhike and kill truck drivers. And she was, if you've ever, if you've never seen interviews with Eileen Warnos and want to get a better idea of her mental stability, she was full on crazy. She was out of her head. Um,
I've
and
seen the
again,
movie.
oh, have you? Okay, Did you see Monster?
Yeah, the one with that Charlie Theron or whatever his name is, who
Yeah,
played her.
Charlize Theron. Yeah,
Yeah, she looked amazing.
yeah,
I don't know how they made her look so like that, but
yeah. It's strange because obviously most serial killers are not women. It's very rare. Although we've talked about a couple, but I think nature versus nurture in this one. She really had she had no. I think she was probably already obviously geared towards mental illness because if you watch interviews of her, she's barely able to hold an actual conversation. She's very violent, and I think that she, it's possible that she had a mental illness as a child, and then that was preyed upon and made every bit worse. And can you imagine? What I would be interested in is knowing. This is what's fascinating to me. We've had a couple people who have had children with these serial killers. I would be interested in knowing, um, this child completely removed, probably probably doesn't have any clue that Eileen Warnos was her mother or his mother. I wonder how that child is.
yeah,
I'd be interested in seeing what kind of a person that child is, being completely removed from the situation, just strictly DNA.
yeah. That is the $1,000,000 question, isn't it?
Yeah.
What that is. if we could take these people as children, and um, show them love and nurture, and try and give them all the life skills that they need, would they still turn out to be these monsters that they turn out that they end up being?
And some of
Um,
them obviously would be because they came from good homes. But I'd like to see what their offspring is like. Like Ted Bundy has a child. Um, Eileen Warnos had a child. Um, I think Gary Ridgway has had children. I'd like to just see. Unfortunately, Gary Ridgway's kids probably know obviously that they're Gary Ridgway's kids, but the Ted Bundy's daughter and Eileen Warnos's child, who have no idea of who their lineage is. I wonder what they're like. Are they completely normal, productive members of society? And would they have been different if they had been raised by their parent? But we'll
well,
never know.
we had another. I'm just going to quickly mention these. Um, did you hear about the Wests, Fred West? Have you heard about Fred West in
I'm not
America?
sure.
He was in Gloucestershire, and his wife was Rose West. These two, he was a builder, um, and basically he buried some of his own children that they raped and tortured in the back garden. He buried them stood up
Oh.
so he could fit more in, basically.
Oh my gosh.
And they would take in lodgers, and his wife, Rose West, she was basically a prostitute, and they would torture these girls. Some of them were really young. They killed their own daughter, um,
Wow.
and she went to prison as well. He killed himself in prison, but
Good.
I think she's still alive. But they proved that some of these murders took place when he wasn't there, so
Oh
she did it.
wow.
She did it.
Wow.
They completely knocked the house. I mean, they were finding they were. I'm going to swear. I'm sorry. They, they were finding fucking bodies everywhere. I mean, he
Mm,
was under the patio all over the show,
mm.
everywhere. He was burying them. He was a builder. You know what I mean? And he had the means to. He paved over the back garden,
Right.
and he just basically said when the police interviewed him, in the end, he just said they're all under the patio, pretty much.
Wow.
And they started digging. They thought there were only one, and then they found one bone, like three leg bones, and they would find not two skulls, and then they find another skull, and
Mm.
then they find another femur, and that they were just like the police were just like, what the fucking hell's going on here?
Right.
They were bringing bodies out, just bringing body out after body after body after body out. But yeah, I mean, they grew up. I mean, Fred West. He was illiterate. He couldn't read or write. He he was. I think they he might have been come from sort of a gypsy background. If I'm
Hmm.
Forgive me if I'm wrong. I can't remember, but yeah, he there was a lot of incest and that in the family,
Ugh.
and crazy, absolutely. I mean, if you ever get a chance to read about him, you'll just won't believe it. It's like some kind of script or a weird Hollywood film. It's just bizarre.
Ugh. That's
Absolutely.
see. That's the thing. Okay, so the things that fascinate me the most are the couples who commit these crimes together,
Yeah.
um, and the people who come from normal childhoods. It, I think I wonder the most about them. You know, what, how do you I don't. How do you find somebody to commit these crimes with? Obviously, they're not going to the library. If they had gone to the library, things would have been a lot better, Rob.
Yeah.
And these people that come from normal homes, with loving parents, what what happens there? Is that a mental illness? Is there a mental illness? What would the mental illness be? Like a psychopath or something that would cause them to not see it as being, or is that what you said? That it would cause them to not see it as being wrong for them?
Well, you
But
could
not every
say
psychopath is a serial killer.
exactly. I mean, it's like saying someone who's schizophrenic and they're hearing voices, and the voices are telling them to kill, to commit crimes. Are they responsible? Are they then responsible for them crimes, or is it the fact that they're hearing voices? It's
Yeah.
really really difficult to wrap your head around it because we don't have those kind of thoughts.
Yeah.
You
Well,
know,
I think that everybody has, I think that everybody experiences something where they're like, you're in traffic and you get really mad and you're like, oh, I could kill that guy. But
yeah, but
then
you don't act upon it, do you?
yeah, you don't act upon it. The next second, it's out of your head, right? That just is like a, ugh, and it goes out.
Yep.
So with these people, clearly it doesn't filter out. And that doesn't mean if I, in the middle of a temper tantrum, on the road, you know, ran somebody off, I would know that was wrong, right? Even for me, I would be like, well, I'm exempt from that. You would know that was wrong. So, and there's a whole list of things that then keep you from committing these crimes because I'm not built for jail. I'm not going to do well. So I don't want to go. Um, you know, I'm afraid of being arrested. Those things go through your head where I think with these serial killers, they think one, they're too smart to be caught, and they
Mm-hmm.
don't worry about that stuff. And then, as it turns out, you're a super famous serial killer. You go to prison and you become a celebrity and treated like one, and you get to be separated.
Yeah.
Except for Jeffrey Dahmer, who, for those of you who don't know, was killed in prison. And the reason the that was given by the man who killed him was that because Jeffrey had made a special friend in prison who was like-minded, and they would put together food from the commissary and make it look like bloody severed limbs and try and scare other inmates, and the other inmates didn't think it was funny and put a stop to it permanently. So you know I I just I think that somebody like him, obviously, he didn't think whatever he did was wrong. He was special. He went to prison and they're treated special. And those 10-year-old boys, they were treated pretty special.
Yeah. I think if we had the death penalty here, it would make a massive difference. I think it would deter people. We have
Do
no
you?
deterrent.
Well, see, they say that here too, but well, first off, I don't know how there's any way for us to for us to know that here. Um, because no potential serial killer ever says, I decided not to be a serial killer so I wouldn't get the death penalty. But why do you think that it would deter?
I think it would deter some crimes, and I think if you're gonna commit a, a horrible act against a child or anything like that, then you're probably going to do it anyway. You're not going to be. It's not going to deter you. But I think it would for some crimes it would deter you. Does every state in America have the death penalty, or does some
No.
states?
Yeah, some states opt out of it. They don't have it. So
That must be so difficult because some of the laws are different in different states, aren't they?
yes.
Oh,
Yes, there's federal laws and there's state laws. Federal law always trumps state law, but as far as the death penalty goes, that's not a federal law. That's left up to states to decide. So, like if you're a serial killer in California, you're not going to get the death penalty. That's life in prison. And that's life without parole. It's a legitimate life in prison.
Yeah.
Other states will give you life in prison plus 140 years. Which is,
You're not getting out, are you?
Yeah, you're not getting out. It's owned. I watched a documentary a couple weeks ago about that, about the California's life in prison and how it's actually a death sentence. But, well, it is, but you're not being executed. It's not the same. It's not the same kind of a deterrent.
You're in favor of the death penalty, aren't you?
Huh?
You're in favor of the death penalty, aren't you?
Yes, I am.
Where do you live now?
I live in Texas.
Texas has still got the death penalty.
Oh, Texas kills more people every year than any other state in the union. If you have the death penalty in Texas, you're going to die.
Was that so? When you said that Texas kills more people every year than any? Was that being serious, or was that like?
Yeah, no, I'm serious. It does.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah, no, it does. We are Go ahead.
You look how much money it costs to keep these people in jail. These murderers and rapists and child molesters, and especially in this country because we have no death penalty. It costs hundreds and hundreds of thousands of pounds a year to house these people. They should just, if you take someone's life, especially a child, and it wasn't an accident, I'm sorry, but you should hang from the neck until you are dead.
Yeah, they say that it costs more money here to put someone to death than it does to house them for life, but I can't see how that's possible. The cost of one bullet compared to a lifetime of medical and food and housing, that doesn't make sense to me. It takes one bullet or one rope. You can reuse a rope. And I don't know.
So what kind of death penalty? What do they? Is it hanging or electric chair or?
It's usually by now most states that have the death penalty and actually use it, it's lethal injection. But the problem with that is that the company that made the drugs for the lethal injection has refused to make them anymore. So we've had several lethal injection deaths in the last couple of years that have gone very bad, and they haven't died. They've had severe pain and suffering, and then they just keep giving them more medicine, drugs until they do die. And so it's considered inhumane. So, I mean, I don't know what they're going to do about that.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
I can't think of a state that does an electric chair anymore. In Washington State, you can choose to have a lethal injection or be hung. And the last person that chose hanging was that Wesley Allen Dodd that I told you that preyed on little boys. He chose hanging, but nobody for 100 years before that had. Because I think most people just choose to go to sleep with the lethal injection. But it's not going to sleep anymore. It's torture. So I don't know.
Yeah, I do. Wish they would. It'll never get brought back here. There's too many do-gooders who, I don't know. See, the thing is, these people that say that they don't want the death penalty.
Now you're talking about Jeremy, and Jeremy is our producer, so tread lightly, or we might not be able to hear you talk anymore.
Well, I'll rephrase what I was going to say. If someone was against the death penalty and something horrendous happened to one of their kids or one of their family, would they still be against the death penalty?
Yes. Now he says yes. He says that he would be still against it. I don't know that you can know until that happens. By the way, do you want to call Jory now? Rob?
Yeah.
Should we call Jory?
Oh, you're talking to me?
Yeah.
Sorry, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, Jeremy, can you hear me? I think he left.
Scared him off.
He's like, that's it. Talking about the death penalty. I'm out of here.
Hello?
Oh, hello.
Well, hello.
Welcome.
Hey.
Hi, mate.
You guys talked for almost 3 hours about blood and guts. I didn't think I was going to be able to get on.
Rob said hi to you, by the way.
Hello, Rob.
Hi, mate. Tracy just doesn't stop talking. Can't get a word in.
Well,
he knows.
I've dealt with it for 33 years, so I'm well practiced in getting around that.
So what's your thoughts?
Like what specifically, Mom? Hit me like a journalist. What are we going to do?
Okay. What are your thoughts? Is there nature versus nurture? Are people born bad seeds? Do they become bad seeds? Both. Is there a reason?
Okay, so I think that it's kind of a little bit of both. I think that humans in general are born with both good and evil in them. We're all born with the ability to kill. I just think that it leans a little bit more towards nature when you start to think about some of the crimes that these people commit. It kind of falls into the category of what our personalities are in general. Like,
excuse me, Jory.
We're supposed to.
Jory, I don't mean to interrupt you.
What?
Can I just answer a question really fast?
Okay.
Mad Meerkat, the death penalty in Utah is death by firing squad. So yes, blood will be spilt. That is the law there. Okay, go ahead, Jory.
Yeah, those Mormons don't have a good time, huh?
Yeah, I guess so. They're not taking any chances. See, they're saving. They're just using one bullet.
No, what I was trying to say was when we're born, we're supposed to naturally take on some traits of our parents because we're supposed to be able to hear things in the womb. But as we grow, we start to become a product of our environment, the people we make friends with, the places that we hang out at, how our family, not just our moms and our dads, or if you're a single parent, just a mom or a dad, but our families in general, how we interact with them, those start to play key roles in our personalities. And so I think it really comes down to a trigger of what happens to you in nature that brings out what you're born with already. I think we're all born with that ability. I think there's not anything in this world that would keep a single person from hitting a breaking point and killing somebody. I think we all have maybe levels of tolerance or levels of good moral compass to not do it. But, like not all of us are sexually molested as children or neglected or mentally or physically abused. And I think those definitely tend to lean more towards triggering something in these people to where maybe as children they didn't know how to understand that, how to grasp that, and they take it out through the means of which they do, murdering and torturing and performing necrophilia acts, stuff like that. So it's, to me, it's kind of a bit of a balance.
So you think that it's more nurture than being born? You think that everybody is born with the potential? If that was true, then how come Rob, who had the same childhood as, let's say, Gary Ridgway, how come they're both not serial killers?
Well, I think it comes down to the point of what I was talking about earlier about a trigger. Rob's situation, he never had that trigger happen to him. Every individual is unique. Like, none of us have perfect childhoods. None of us have perfect adulthoods.
I thought you said you had a perfect childhood.
They're not. No, you said I had a perfect childhood.
Oh. Okay. One of us did, I know.
But I think that as unique individuals, all of us are maybe pre-designed with a point before we hit our trigger. And maybe with Rob, he's better equipped, either through genetics or maybe he was just able to catch on quickly, you know, the difference between right and wrong and how the right and wrong does apply to him. Where the same people or some people in his exact same situation would have hit a trigger, and that would have triggered a mental illness to where maybe they knew right and wrong, but they didn't care, or maybe they didn't know the difference between right and wrong because they weren't taught that as they were being mentally and physically abused by their father. I think it boils down more to we're all born with it, because if you want to go all the way back to when we were gatherers and hunters, we had to kill to survive.
Mm-hmm.
So we're born with it. We're all born with that ability. But the nurturing comes in as we progress through life. And if we're not built to handle situations that come at us like most people are, you're going to hit that trigger. You're going to hit something that's going to tell you, it's okay for me to go kill this woman that looks like my mom because my mom was a piece of crap. And that's okay because she was evil. And you
Thanks for using that example.
Well, no, I'm just saying, like, you know, Ted Bundy killed women that looked like his girlfriend because she broke his heart. So in his mind, it was okay because these women were his girlfriend.
Okay.
And they hurt him.
Okay, but back to the... Yes, go ahead.
Can I ask you a question then? We talked about two young boys who were 10 in Liverpool, and they took a little boy who was 2, and basically they tortured him and killed him and tried to hide what they had done. I mean, they were 10 years old. Now, I agree with what you said to a point, but these kids came from pretty good sort of middle-ish class backgrounds. What do you think could have been the trigger for them? Because for all intents and purposes, they had a pretty good childhood.
And, you know, you make a good point when you bring that up. And I think it boils down to when I was talking about how every individual is unique. Maybe in this case, like you guys have been talking about earlier, maybe some people are just born that way. I can't think it's a lot of people. It's probably rare, but there is scientific studies that are showing that you can actually link a specific part of the brain to people who eventually become serial killers. And that part of the brain is more active in those people than in people like us. And in that case, maybe that kid's part of his, or those kids is part of their brain, at least one of them, because you guys were implying earlier that the other one might have been coerced or forced or scared into doing it. Maybe that part of his brain was advanced enough to push this 10-year-old kid into already committing these crimes, already believing himself to, I can't say for sure what goes on in people who do that, even little kids, but it could be something like that. It's hard because you want to look at it scientifically and through psychology, and then you hear about 2 10-year-old kids killing a 2-year-old boy, and then you kind of have to go back and reevaluate everything, because like Rob said, they came from a normal home. So what would have triggered that? I don't know. But
did you hear when we was talking about, was it John Wayne Gacy, and I said hypothetically, if you could go back, because he had a bad childhood, if you could go back in time and take this child away from his family and bring him and nurture him and love him and teach him his boundaries, and do you think that maybe he would have turned out differently?
I would lean towards yes, and I will say why. So I don't have any of the paperwork or the links with me right now, but there was a case study that was done on a girl who was about 5 or 6 years old, and she was brought in by police because her parents woke up to her standing next to their bed with a knife. So they didn't know what to do. They called the cops. They brought her in and they interviewed her, and she told them that and I believe she was in the foster system. I believe she's had to bounce through a couple homes. She told them that all she could think about was killing her parents, her foster parents, and she had no feelings towards it. She just wanted to kill them and be done with them. But once they gave her therapy, once they gave her people who showed that they cared for her and loved her, she ended up becoming a fine example of an adult who began a career and has started a family of her own and has not shown any of the tendency that she showed as a child, having only just stood at the side of the bed with a knife, not even performing the act. So I think let's say John Wayne Gacy, if you could go back and take him away from the environment he grew up in, put him in a different environment where the family completely loved him and he didn't have any of those issues, he might have gone on to be a different person. But that's just kind of one of those things where if we had a time machine, we could do it, but we don't, so we'll never know. But it is interesting that they were able to take a 6-year-old girl who had serial killer tendencies, give her the proper therapy and the proper family care that she needed, and then she became a completely normal adult in life.
That's interesting. That's really, really interesting.
But the trouble is like understanding those signs. And I think as we progress as a society, we're seeing like, oh, he tortures animals, he lights things on fire, he likes to steal girls' underwear, or he likes to whatever. I think we're kind of getting to a point where we're seeing, okay, this isn't normal behavior. We need to show him that we love him and give him the proper care. And I don't think we had that ability, because I feel like whenever I read about serial killers, it's mostly like the late 1800s and then going into the early to mid 1900s. And then it kind of slowly starts to fade away a little bit. Not that they're gone, obviously. But I think as we progress in time, we're starting to scientifically understand how serial killers work. And I think it boils down to just trying to keep kids in loving homes and loving families and showing them that they are important to society and that they do belong, because if they don't feel important to society and they don't belong, they're going to find ways to figure that out.
Yeah.
So.
Well, thank you, Jory.
Just my 2 cents.
That was very interesting.
Probably wrong. I'm not licensed, people. I'm not licensed.
You just play a psychiatrist on TV?
Yeah.
Podcasts?
Yeah.
Yeah, me too.
Podcasts, TV, and commercials.
Yeah. Well, does anybody who's listening have any questions they'd like to ask, or any comments or thoughts on nature versus nurture? You can ask. We'll give you guys a second. And while we're doing that, I'm going to say that remember that we are going to be switching over to Twitch. So we're giving you some time to go over there, get an account. If you'd like to head over and follow me, you would go to twitch.tv/the exit light. And then you can follow me. I also have a Patreon account. Like I say all the time, it is absolutely unnecessary to donate towards the Patreon account. But if you would like to, that would be greatly appreciated. And I also want to say that I am going to be doing a gift card giveaway when my channel is up for review. So when my channel is gets done being up for review and hopefully monetized, then I'll go ahead and we'll go with a gift card giveaway. So I am waiting right now for that. And after this podcast, then probably will not monetize me if they're against breastfeeding 12-year-olds. That's their problem. But I look forward to doing that because you guys know I like to do the giveaways. So it doesn't appear that anybody has a question. Jory, next week we are going to be doing mysterious, strange disappearances. Is that correct?
Yes, and is it in national parks or just in general?
I think we're going to go ahead and do national parks.
Okay.
So, is there anything else anybody wants to add? Rob, Jory?
I think we've covered everything in the last 12 hours.
Yes, I think we have. I think we've also established that if you are single and you'd like to meet a nice man who doesn't beat you up or will kill you, go to the library. And now every serial killer on their planet is like, I should probably go to the library. I can meet a nice girl.
I would just like to say that I think you two did a good job of letting everybody in who might not normally follow serial killers in on maybe some signs that they can look for in future relationships with people from this point forward. Or if you're currently in a relationship with someone who you thought was weird, guess what?
Get out
now.
Yeah, and if you're with anybody who works in a mortuary and says, hey, we got some sexy thing in tonight, leave. Go to the library.
I got this cool new disease that everybody's in on. You want to try it?
Yeah. All right. Then thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank you, Rob. I had a great time. It was very educational for everybody. Thank you, Jory, for popping in. Thank you to moderator Maya and to producer Jeremy. And I will see you back here Wednesday for another podcast with Jory. And Woo-hoo. Good night.